Hey everyone, it's Golda. Welcome to another episode of my interview show. And today we are honored to have our guest here, Martin Cooper. Welcome, Martin. It's our pleasure to have you with us, and I'm looking forward to this one. You know, Martin, my perception of doing accounting stuff is like mind-boggling numbers, but wow, you have this passion and you're enthusiastic with helping companies with bookkeeping. So how do you develop this passion?
So actually it started when I was very young. For some reason, and I've never really put my finger on it, when I was about 6 or 7, I used to love doing long division by hand. So get a big piece of paper out, choose 2 numbers, one small, one big, and divide one into the other, to 7, 8, 10, 20 decimal places. I used to love it. And then I used to tell my mother the answer. And for some reason that I never quite understood, she wasn't that interested. And I said to her one day, I really like doing this stuff. What should I do when I grow up? And she said, be an accountant. And actually, from about 6 or 7, I never really changed my mind all the way through school and to college and stuff. So it started with just an interest, a simple childhood interest in numbers. But then once I got into the career and understood it, and you realize how influential a good accountant, whether it's a bookkeeper or an accountant or a CFO, can be into a business, it's really interesting. And in my career, full-time roles, I've worked in 11 separate companies, completely separate industries, separate activities. So it's always a field that's got more to add. You can get as involved in the business as you like, and you can get involved in as many businesses as you like. Every company in every country in the world needs an accountant. So in terms of job scope and opportunities, it's probably, I'm slightly biased, but it's probably one of the best careers you can have for that continual ability to refresh what you're doing rather than being stuck in one industry or one particular occupation. So like I said, I have no idea what kicked it off, but it was that just enjoying playing around with numbers that was the real start.
Well, right now you have started Cooper Financials, right? So it's like virtual bookkeeping. Is it sort of an automation?
There is, one of the key drivers behind bookkeeping and sort of accounting at the moment is automation, along with probably every other sort of aspect of life. When I first started work as an accountant, we used to do bookkeeping as a sort of one of your preliminary jobs. And a plumber or an electrician would come to the office literally with a cardboard box of his invoices for the year, tip it onto the desk. And then with a piece of paper, big A3 piece of paper, we would do the books by hand with pencils. And it was such a tedious task. And you can imagine that the sheet went across and then down, and then you get sheet after sheet after sheet, and all had to add up and balance, and it never did. So that the final number or the final page always had almost a hole in it because you rub it out so many times to correct. And so that's how bookkeeping used to be. But now with the advent of things like Xero, QuickBooks and other accounting systems, and other technology like Receipt Bank, or DEX as it's now called, that can upload your receipts into your accounting system automatically, and the accounting systems can link the bank to your accounting system. All that really dull and fiddly bookkeeping is now automated. So that makes the whole process so much easier. And I had a call with someone earlier on, and I was saying the principles that I was using when I did it with a piece of paper and a pencil is exactly the same. Nothing's really changed. Double entry bookkeeping, balancing stuff and that kind of stuff, it is exactly the same principles. You're just using the computer to do it. So because of that, rather than a guy having to physically come into your office and you sort of taking his physical invoice under your possession for a while, you can do it all virtually. I'm here in Singapore, but most of our clients are in the UK. And most of them we've never met and never needed to. But we can do everything online. Obviously communication with them and Zoom and all this kind of stuff is now well established, but all the bookkeeping aspects can be done online. I can have access to it. Our staff around the world can have access to it, and the client can have access to it, and you never need to be in the same room. So it's the way it's done is fundamentally different. The underlying principles probably haven't changed in 150 years.
Right, maybe can you do a rundown for us for, let's say I want to do a startup, zero knowledge for bookkeeping. How would you guide me and get me running? A little course? Yeah.
Exactly. So bookkeepers aren't really renowned for their humor, but there's a little bookkeeping joke that I read the other day. So lower expectations is not particularly funny, but it basically says, if the client wants me to do it, I'll charge him 100% of the fee. If the client wants to watch, I'll charge him 110%. If the client wants to help, I'll charge him 120%. And if the client wants to do it first, I'll charge him 200%. Like I say, it's not much of a joke, but the principle is that bookkeeping is a specialist thing, and you wouldn't go and do surgery on yourself or maybe write your own complicated legal agreements. Yet for some reason people think, and I think it's because Xero tries to simplify it, that they can do the bookkeeping. So my first recommendation is to employ a professional bookkeeper, get everything set up nice and neatly and sensibly. If in due course that the founder wants to take on some of the work, then great. But one of the things with Cooper Financials is that we say is what we want to do is take all that burden and that stuff off the founder so they can focus on whatever it is their passion is, whatever it is they want to drive, whatever it is they want to do. So they stick to what their expertise is and leave other experts to do their expertise. So my first advice is really employ a good bookkeeper and leave them to it. The other thing that we do in Cooper Financials, which is why we started the business, is to try and to make sure we communicate with the founder. So while he leaves us to do the bookkeeping, that doesn't mean to say the only interaction is at the end of the year when we say, right, you owe this much in tax. Every month we write to each client to say, we've got the books up to date, here's the results. And some people just go, oh, thanks. Some people you can see, are reasonably interested. Other people really want to know. And my other piece of advice is they really should want to know. And the point of one of the key objectives of Cooper Financials is to help people understand. Because it doesn't matter whether you're running a small business or a big conglomerate, you still need to understand how the finances are looking, what trends you can see, and what you can then do to improve it. So it's kind of three things. One is leave it to the expert, employ someone who will communicate with you and take an interest in that. You don't have to get into the detail of how a balance sheet works and complicated double entry bookkeeping and stuff, but at least understand the financial position of the company and ask the questions and employ someone who will answer them in a way you'll understand.
Right. Is there any difference in bookkeeping, like for a startup versus a big company?
In some ways, no. As with my example of bookkeeping from 30 odd years ago, the principles are all exactly the same. The only difference is the scale of what you're trying to do, and also probably the level of complication. I mean, typically a startup starts doing one thing, and therefore the bookkeeping, and if you have the interest in looking into it, the understanding of the accounts is quite straightforward. Whereas at a much bigger organization, they're often doing many things at once. So then the key thing is to kind of extract each activity and make sure you understand that, not just get this big sort of blob of numbers that you can't really understand. So the simplicity of the startup is often exactly that, and makes the bookkeeping easier and the understanding of the accounts easier. But as I say, the accounting principles, double entry bookkeeping, is 150 years old and probably hasn't changed in all that time. So it's same.
So, right. How does the solution cater to different business models? Since you're saying about it hasn't changed much, right? But is there like a specific thing that your solution cater to different business model?
So the way Xero set up and QuickBooks and this kind of thing, there's the basic accounting system that comes with a basic subscription. But the last time I checked, Xero had something like 800 different apps that you could either completely ignore or cherry pick the ones you wanted to add to your business. So whereas when I was young, if you wanted a new system, you had it was a huge expense, hugely complicated implementation process, and it needed experts to get involved with it. And it was only ever worthwhile if you had a really big business. Whereas now with, let's say, Xero or QuickBooks as your base, you can cherry pick these apps and actually end up with quite a sophisticated sort of accounting system, whether you're looking after stock or whether you really want to interrogate your monthly report with some of the apps that exist, or you're wanting to link to Shopify and other such things. But you can do that really specifically for your business and make it really quite bespoke. And I can imagine if you took that system back, like say 20 years or something, someone would think, wow, this is super expensive and super complicated. But actually, I think almost all the apps that you use, the link to Xero is a 2-minute thing that someone has zero IT knowledge can do. So there's no complicated integration. Again, people that remember this will always, if there's a problem with the system, it's the one system provider argues it's the other system provider, or it's the hardware and all this kind of stuff. It just doesn't exist anymore. So using, like I said, one of the good bookkeeping systems and careful selection of the apps that you want to apply to your business, you can get something quite sophisticated. And therefore, it doesn't really, from our perspective, it doesn't really matter the business model that someone's using, because now you can bespoke it to whatever you like. So from that point of view, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't affect anything. So we could do any business model. What we happen to have almost slipped into is a lot of UK-based companies that have US activities. And again, because it's all virtual, it just makes no difference. I mean, there would have been a time where you couldn't operate with a US subsidiary unless you had bookkeeping for a US subsidiary, unless you had someone in the US. But now, because it's all virtual, it doesn't matter where the client is or where their operation is, as long as they're either based here in Singapore, where we have some clients, or in the UK, their operations can be worldwide. So there's no real scope. Kind of comes back to my point that every company in every country in the world needs an accountant, and the principles are the same. So there's no limitation really to the type of business that we can operate in.
So as long as the accountant is like using your app, he or she be able to understand your system. Is that what you are trying to say?
Yeah, no. So I wouldn't call it our system. It's their system. I mean, the Xero or QuickBooks or whatever the accounting system is one that they would choose. We can accommodate any, and then the apps that go along with that are all external apps. And again, we can help the client, or they can look into it themselves. What's useful to them. So it's their system that they can make bespoke for their purposes. And because the universal rules around accounting, from our perspective, it doesn't matter. We can deal with any of them really.
Right. This is just like $1 million question. Hopefully it doesn't cost $1 million. If a startup were to engage you for this service, is this like a subscription fee base, or how much would it cost?
Yeah. So there's a mixture of services. There's 3 things that the government insist upon. So it's nothing to do with Cooper Financials or the accounting industry. One is that you do your tax returns. The other is that you submit your financial statements. And I'm talking here now just in Singapore. And the other is that you have a company secretary. And that has to be someone that has a reasonable understanding of the law. So we provide those 3 services. And for each one of those, it's around on a startup, smallest business, it's about $500 to do. So you'd pay $500 for your tax return to be completed, $500 for your financial statements to be completed and submitted, and $500 for your company secretary, if you need those 3 services. Some people choose different companies to do different things, but if you need each 3 of those, so it starts at a sort of $1,500 a year fee. But that's only paid as the activities happen, and you wouldn't need to file your financial statements for 5 to 6 months after your year end. So 18 months or so after you'd start, you'd get that first transaction. And then the bookkeeping, that really depends on the complication of the activities. We have some drop shipping businesses which actually are huge, but their accounting is really, really quite simple. And even though they can turn over more than $1 million a month, the bill for them is, for that basic bookkeeping, is about $250. Whereas we have another sort of insurance broker type company in the UK that is really quite fiddly, and we charge him about £150 a month, which is also, probably about the same, but his turnover is probably less in the whole year than the drop shipping company in the 1 month. So sort of summary answer to the question, it's about $500 for tax, $500 for the financial statements, $500 for company secretary if they want one, and then around $200 plus a month for the bookkeeping service.
All right. So I'm just curious about this. Okay, one of the interesting aspects of accounting is forensic accounting, like spotting fraud, to see how you could look at the balance sheet, an income statement or cash flow statement, and find things that are unusual based on your years of experience as CFO and other positions. Have you encountered any sort of financial frauds?
Yeah, so I spent about 6 years as an internal auditor, which is looking, work for two separate companies, but looking into the details. And an aspect of that, not the main aspect, but an aspect of that is to try and identify fraud. And there was one fraud that we got involved in, which we identified by just looking at the balance sheet and what the chap had done to try and ensure he got his bonus that year was continually inflate his stock levels.
Wow.
So eventually you can see a ratio that says, the stock is going up, but sales are also going up, and it doesn't make sense. So as the internal auditor, I went to their factory one day on a surprise visit and gathered all the data that I possibly could. And him and the accountant, the CFO, were both sacked because they were both colluding on the whole thing. And then another company, and this is where fraud becomes much more difficult. There was a huge business in the UK, and they had their own printing arm. But one of the guys that worked for them, he didn't like the idea that if he gave printing contracts to the internal company, he got no kickback. And what he liked to do was take the work to an external company to get his own, and say, I'll give you this work if you give me some money, or you buy me some tickets for this, or whatever. And we ended up identifying that just by looking at the way he controlled the contracts that he was dealing with. So rather than give it straight to the internal facility, or give the internal facility time to, have time to quote on it, he would wait until the very last minute, give them the work, and they'd say we can't do it. Then he'd be able to pass it outside. And eventually, with this history, we could interview him, and he confessed to the fact he was deliberately giving them the internal contracts late, so that the internal company couldn't do it, and then he would get the kickback. And then he was also sacked.
Oh.
But it's amazing what people get up to. At the same company, there was a driving school that was being developed, and by the guy that developed it, he agreed with his boss that they get air miles. There's a big phase in the UK years ago about giving free air miles away.
Yeah.
And so he got like 1 million air miles bought for this launch, and everyone that took on the driving school was their preferred way of being instructed to drive got free air miles. And then at the end of the promotional period, there's still a few 100,000 air miles left. So he said to his boss, "Shall I just give these to charity?" And without paying attention, his boss went, "Yeah, sure, give them to charity." So fine, case closed. Until a woman I shared a lift with, who also worked with their husband. Her husband was the guy that ran this company. We'd gone on holiday to South Africa, and she was bragging about the fact they'd gone to South Africa with the whole family, 3 or 4 children and friends, and they'd gone first class.
Wow.
It doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
You have good money, but not super good money. So anyway, we looked into it, and it turned out the charity that the guy had given the air miles to was something that he was the beneficiary to.
Oh.
So he just used the air miles to give to, I don't know what he called the charity, some charity, then he used. And stuff like that, and the other one with the printing. You can look at the accounts all day long, and you'd never see the fraud, because it's something someone's doing sort of outside the accounting system. When you look at it, the printing example was just giving contracts externally that couldn't be done internally. What's wrong with that? And the guy who ran the driving school gave away air miles to a charity. What's wrong with that? So you need other non-financial data and real depth sometimes to really see the nature of the fraud, which is why you get these really big companies that go bust, and it surprises everybody. because you
Yeah.
can't really see it externally. However carefully you look at what they present externally, it's just not there.
Right. Because in the past, I used to hear something about Crazy Eddie, and there's this thing about the footnote they try to change, but I have no idea. And it seems like a big story. Yeah, just to know what are some of the solutions out there to prevent things like this from happening. Is there any solution?
And there's no one shot solution that works. One of the things that we do, certainly as a company gets larger, is talk about segregation of duties, which is key. Again, another fraud I was involved in. A company the company is based in Singapore, but it was a US subsidiary. The accountant ended up with sole control of a bank account, so she could write the checks and pay them to whoever she wanted. She ended up paying them entirely to herself, but she could only do that. And this happened after I left, so I hold myself entirely blameless to the whole thing. But somehow they allowed it that she was sole control of the bank account. And once you've got sole control, and her life had taken a bit of a downturn, she got divorced and this kind of stuff, then temptation comes in its way. And then people behave in a way they've never dreamed that they would behave, even themselves. So she ended up going to jail for some time as a result. But segregation of duties is key, meaning no one person should ever have control over any one process. There should always be at least two people involved. There's still a chance of collusion, and they both choose to do something fraudulent, but it massively reduces the chance. So I would always encourage people to make sure that any important processes, and certainly anything that involves money, whether it's agreeing to contract prices or sending money out of the bank account, or agreeing to supplier prices, is always reviewed by someone else, checked by someone else, or there's some level of authority that goes into it. It's quite day-to-day stuff, but it's super easy to kind of not focus on it, especially when the business is growing fast and all you're thinking about is moving quickly and growing and that kind of stuff. But trying to keep that process in place, especially with odd transactions, and this Air Miles one is an odd transaction, so it kind of fell outside the normal rules. No one bothered to independently check the charity that you gave it to. So again, it gave him massive opportunity to do this fraudulent process. So segregation of duties, I'd say, would be the fundamental step in the process.
Right. Just get some questions towards your personal life. Maybe, what's the first 100 days like when you're, being appointed as a CFO? Is there somebody guiding you, or?
Yeah, no. So between bookkeeping and CFO is completely the other end of the range. So no, when you start work as a CFO, you don't get direct guidance. Your experience should tell you what to do. And the key thing from a CFO perspective is to understand the business, understand where the business is right now, and understand where the business is heading in the next 2 or 3 years. And from that, you work out for yourself what's really important. And what I would say is, as part of a sort of first 100 days for CFO, you talk to as many people as you possibly can. The board members for sure, the CEO for sure, but also your peers, obviously the key accounting staff, but also get out and about within the business to talk to other people that you wouldn't perhaps ordinarily speak to, just to get this really broad picture of what the status the business is in, and like I say, an understanding of its plans. In terms of sort of explanation, a bookkeeper would just process invoices, and that would be it. They wouldn't really understand where the business is going. An accountant or financial controller would take those invoices and be able to produce a set of accounts and be able to give at least an elementary explanation of what the business is doing sort of right now based on what they can see, but it'll probably be quite basic. Whereas a CFO should see the business both in terms of what's happened in the past to work out trends and where the business is going, but also understand the future. So look at profit forecast, cash flow forecast, and stuff like that. So they have the much wider picture, but are also much more driven to where the business is heading, rather than typical accounting. What happened last month. which is where a bookkeeper and accountant are mostly focused. So there's no one that guides you. Let's say your experience should be your guide, but understanding the business, what they're really trying to achieve, and what the key levers are that they have to maximize the chance of that success.
Right, because we have a lot of young accountants out there and they aspire to be a CFO, if I'm not wrong. And would you be able to give some advice to the young people, or how should they navigate their way to hold some important positions like you do? So give the advice.
Yeah, I would say the key thing is when you grasp every opportunity you possibly can. The difference between sort of the controller, accountant, and the CFO is someone that understands the business and wants to get involved. Obviously, you're an accountant, so you're mostly focused on the financial aspect, but wants to get involved in the broader side. And one of the things I did later in my career was an MBA, which was specifically because if you get too narrowly focused on accounting and what happened last month, someone needs to do that, but there's a certain level that you'll stay at if that's sort of your maximum capability. So I did an MBA, which it's a big commitment in time and stuff, so I wouldn't say it has to be the route that people take. But for me personally, it was good to sort of broaden my mind. So you weren't just an accountant, you understood the broader aspects of the business. But I think that the key thing is continually looking beyond the numbers, I would say. So I remember when I first became a controller and I presented the first sort of monthly management account, so my explanations were along the lines of the budget was 10, we spent 12, so we've overspent by 2. Next line, the budget was 8, we spent 7, so we underspent by 1. Which factually, absolutely correct. In terms of usefulness for the CEO running the business, absolutely zero. And he kind of pulled me aside and said, Martin, next time, he's a really nice, polite British guy, next time, try and get the story behind the story. So he just wanted to know, so we overspent by 2, I can see that, but why? Is that going to continue? Is there a one-off thing? Should I worry about it? What can we do to change it? And if it's if it's revenue, we've gone over budget, it's good. How can we go even more over budget? Do you know what I mean? So continually have that kind of thought in your mind. How do I really understand these numbers well enough that if someone says, well, how do I improve? What are my actions? If you're the accountant and you find yourself saying, well, I don't know. I know it's gone up by 2, but I don't know why. That's wrong. You need to get into it and say, well, it's because of this, and this, and we can do that, and that. That's the key thing.
Right. I know there's tons more we can get into, Martin. I really enjoy our conversation now. I really do think we got to do our whole accounting series listening to this, because I think I'll probably like just all of this stuff about different ways to read financial statements, different things to spot. Maybe you could do a series on how companies cheat or financial fraud regulations have different countermeasures. I would really like to listen to that. And I haven't thought about this way before until you described how it motivated you in this line and also help companies and startups. Well, to wrap it up, thanks so much for your time and my beloved audience, and have a good one.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
I'm excited to give you an update. If you are one of the higher management in your company and you wish to promote yourself and your businesses, please send me an email at service@goldenchill.com. Last but not least, please like and subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you on YouTube.